What if I told you the US Treasury is in the middle of a secret 7 step plan to change the very nature of money? It doesn't start with crypto, it starts with something they've held for a century, gold, and it ends with the one asset they can't control, Bitcoin. This isn't just a theory, this is the government's hidden endgame for money itself, and today we're going to expose every single step. For decades, the United States Treasury has operated behind a curtain, managing the world's reserve currency through complex maneuvers and carefully worded statements. They tell us it's all to maintain financial stability. They tell us it's for our own good. But what if the real goal is something else entirely? What if the slow, deliberate moves we've seen over the years aren't random events, but a coordinated strategy? A plan designed not just to manage the dollar's decline, but to control whatever comes next. This is a story about power. The power to create money, control it, and ultimately rewrite the rules for the 21st century. The architects of our financial system aren't just sitting on the sidelines watching the world go digital. They're building the tracks for a new system, one that promises efficiency but could deliver unprecedented control. Most people see the headlines, a new executive order, a bill, a Fed report, and they just see noise. They see a government fumbling to keep up with technology, but when you connect the dots, when you line up the events, a clear picture emerges, a 7 step endgame. It's ambitious, it's audacious, and it's happening right now in plain sight. Today, we pull back that curtain. This is the playbook they don't want you to see, the one that takes us from the vaults of Fort Knox to the cold storage of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Step one, the Gold Precedent, a blueprint for control. To understand where the Treasury is going, you have to understand where it's been. The government's blueprint for controlling a monetary asset wasn't written for Bitcoin. It was perfected a century ago with gold. For most of American history, the dollar was tied to gold, meaning the government had to hold a ton of it to back the currency. But in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt decided the government needed more power to fight the crisis. The discipline of gold, the very thing meant to provide stability, was now seen as a roadblock. So in 1933, the government did something almost unthinkable today. Through Executive Order 6102, it compelled U.S. citizens to turn in their gold coins and bullion to the Federal Reserve in exchange for paper dollars. While there were exceptions for things like jewelry and collectible coins, the message was clear. The government was centralizing control. This wasn't a request, it was a demand. A year later, the Gold Reserve Act of 1934 was passed. This act officially transferred the title of all the nation's gold to the U.S. Treasury, solidifying its control. With the country's gold supply now consolidated, the government did something extraordinary. It changed the price. Overnight, the statutory price of gold was raised from $20.67 to $35 an ounce. This single move instantly devalued the dollar against gold and made the Treasury's newly acquired holdings vastly more valuable. It also created a massive incentive for gold to flow into the United States from other countries. Between 1930 and 1940, U.S. gold holdings more than tripled. By the early 1950s, the U.S. controlled around half of the entire world's official gold reserves. Think about this playbook. Step 1, compel the public to give up the asset. Step 2, consolidate it on the government's balance sheet. Step 3, revalue it to strengthen your financial position and dominate the market. This sequence set a precedent. It showed that when faced with a crisis, the government isn't afraid to rewrite the rules and centralize control. This isn't just some dusty old history lesson. It's the exact framework being dusted off today. The players and the asset have changed, but the game is the same. The Treasury learned from gold that absolute control over the ultimate reserve asset gives it absolute power. Now, as we're entering a new digital era, they're looking for the next asset to control, the digital gold. But first, they need to build a system that makes you want to give up the idea of private money. They need a Trojan horse. Step 2, the Trojan Horse, Central Bank Digital Currencies, CBDCs. The next step in the endgame is to build new monetary rails. It's a system designed to look like an upgrade, but built with a hidden purpose. This is the global push for central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. On the surface, the story is pretty appealing. They tell us CBDCs will make payments faster, cheaper, and more inclusive. And it's not some fringe experiment, it's a coordinated global movement. As of 2025, a staggering 134 countries representing 98% of the world's GDP are exploring or developing a CBDC. The US has been quietly laying the groundwork. The Boston Fed partnered with MIT on Project Hamilton to explore the tech behind a CBDC, producing a model capable of handling over 1 million transactions per second. While that specific project has wrapped up, the New York Fed continues to explore wholesale versions, and the research from Project Hamilton was made open source, providing a technical foundation for a future digital dollar. But beneath the promises of efficiency lies a darker possibility. Unlike Bitcoin, a CBDC isn't decentralized. It's a direct liability of the central bank, giving the government a direct window into everyone's financial life. This introduces the terrifying concept of programmable money. In a CBDC world, your money could come with rules. Imagine the government issuing stimulus payments that expire in 30 days to force you to spend, or restricting purchases of certain things, like too much gas or red meat, in the name of public policy. They could even impose negative interest rates directly on your savings, making your money slowly vanish unless you spend it. Critics have called this the weaponization of money, turning it from a tool of freedom into an instrument of control. Every transaction is recorded on a central ledger, killing financial privacy. Former officials have warned that a CBDC could give authorities the power to freeze or seize your funds with a click. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. The CBDC push is the agitate phase of the plan. The problem is framed as our current system being slow. The agitation is the fear of being left behind by countries like China, and the solution they offer is a digital dollar. But the real solution they're moving toward is a system where their centralized currency is ultimately backed by a decentralized asset they can control through sheer volume. The CBDC is the Trojan Horse, designed to get you comfortable with digital money on the government's terms. Once the new rails are built, the next step is to officially take over. Step 3, the official takeover, laying the legal groundwork. Once the idea of a government digital currency is normalized, the next move is to create the legal framework to bring the entire digital asset world under federal control. This is where we see a series of carefully timed executive orders and laws moving from research to real policy. The first big step was President Biden's Executive Order 14,067 in March 2022. It was called Ensuring Responsible Development of Digital Assets and was framed as a way to protect consumers and study a U.S. CBDC. But its most important function was ordering the entire government, from the Treasury to the DOJ, to create a unified crypto strategy. For the first time, the White House treated crypto as a matter of national security. The message was clear: the government was stepping onto the field. This was followed by a flood of reports from the Treasury and other agencies, all highlighting the risks of crypto and the gaps in regulation that needed to be filled. They were building the public case for why more government oversight was absolutely necessary. Then the political winds shifted. On January 23, 2025, a new administration issued its own executive order, strengthening American leadership in digital financial technology. This one took a totally different tone. It revoked the previous order and explicitly prohibited work on a retail CBDC, framing it as a threat to privacy. On the surface, this looked like a huge win for crypto fans, but the real purpose was much more strategic. Instead of a CBDC, this new order pivoted to something else, creating a President's Working Group on Digital Asset Markets and evaluating a Strategic National Digital Asset Stockpile. That was the bombshell. The government wasn't just talking about regulating crypto anymore. It was now officially exploring the idea of stockpiling it, just like it does with gold and oil. This pivot was politically brilliant. It quieted the privacy advocates by rejecting a retail CBDC, while at the same time it advanced the main goal, government accumulation. The narrative changed from controlling how you spend to securing our national assets. Just a few weeks later, on March 6, 2025, this plan went into overdrive with another executive order. This one was direct. It officially mandated the creation of a U.S. strategic Bitcoin reserve. The language was explicit, calling Bitcoin digital gold and noting its fixed supply of 21 million coins. It stated there is a strategic advantage to being among the first nations to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. That order was the point of no return. It was the government officially declaring its intent to treat Bitcoin not as a speculative asset, but as a strategic reserve on par with gold. The legal groundwork was set. The next step was to build the machine to fill that reserve. Step 4, the Strategic Hoard, the Bitcoin Act, and national accumulation. With the policy of a strategic Bitcoin reserve set by executive order, the fourth step is to create the actual law for accumulating Bitcoin on a national scale. This is where a proposed bill, the Bitcoin Act, comes into play. The Building on the Incentives for Transparent and Comprehensive Investment in Our Nation Act. or Bitcoin Act, was introduced in the Senate on March 11th, 2025, just days after the executive order. The timing is no coincidence. The White House gave the directive, the act gives the Treasury the machinery to get it done. The bill's purpose is to create a formal structure for how the US government buys and holds Bitcoin. The model is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or SPR. The SPR, authorized in 1975 and started in 1977, was created to protect the US from global oil shocks. The government stores massive quantities of oil, creating a national buffer that gives it huge leverage on the world stage. The Bitcoin Act aims to create the digital version of this. The act proposes capitalizing the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve first with the Bitcoin the government already has. As of mid-2025, the US government was one of the largest known holders of Bitcoin, with around 198,000 BTC seized from cases like the Silk Road and the Bitfinex hack. But the act and the orders go way further. They direct the Treasury to develop budget-neutral pathways to acquire more Bitcoin. How discussions in Washington roundtables have floated ideas for acquiring as much as 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years without direct taxpayer cost. One proposed mechanism is to allow federal taxes to be paid in Bitcoin. The Bitcoin collected wouldn't be sold for dollars, but would be sent straight to the strategic reserve. This would create a steady, non-disruptive flow of Bitcoin onto the government's balance sheet. Another method involves the Treasury lending its Bitcoin to institutions and getting more back in interest, slowly growing its stack. This accumulation phase is the most critical part of the end game. By creating a massive state-controlled hoard of Bitcoin, the Treasury corners a huge chunk of its finite supply, giving it immense market influence. It positions the US as the dominant sovereign holder of the world's top digital reserve asset, and it creates a powerful new policy tool. Just as releasing oil from the SPR can affect gas prices, the ability to use Bitcoin from the reserve gives the government a powerful lever in the digital economy. The strategy isn't to buy Bitcoin on the open market like a normal investor. That would be politically toxic and drive up the price. Instead, it's to create a system to absorb it passively and permanently through sovereign powers, like taxation. They aren't just buying Bitcoin, they are positioning themselves to nationalize its future flow. What we're talking about here isn't just financial news, it's a fundamental shift in the architecture of money and power. The clues are scattered across executive orders, proposed bills, central bank papers, and Treasury reports. But when you connect those dots, the picture becomes undeniable. If you want to stay ahead of these moves and understand exactly what they mean for your money, your sovereignty, and your long-term financial future, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. This channel exists to connect the dots the mainstream media refuses to touch. And if you want even deeper insights, make sure you sign up for my free weekly market newsletter using the link in the description. I break down the real macro shifts, Bitcoin signals, and policy moves shaping the next decade of wealth. It's the best way to stay informed without the noise. I'm also developing a full set of macro investing and trading classes, and newsletter subscribers will be the first to get early access as soon as they're completed, along with exclusive pricing and bonuses. Now, let's get back to the final steps, because this is where the plan goes global. Step 5, monetizing the rails, becoming the digital toll booth. Once the government has its centralized digital currency and has started hoarding the world's decentralized store of value, the fifth step is to monetize the system. This part is speculative, but it's the logical next move. It involves the government positioning itself not just as a player in the digital market, but as the central toll booth operator for all transactions. In today's financial system, governments make money mainly through taxes. In a tokenized, blockchain-based economy, a new, much more granular form of revenue is possible. Transaction fees. Every time an asset moves on a blockchain, a small fee is paid. Analysts believe the government's plan is to position itself to capture a piece of every single one. How could this work? There are a couple of avenues. The most direct method is through the digital dollar itself. If the US launches a CBDC or a system of federally regulated stablecoins, the government could become the ultimate validator of those networks. By processing every transaction, the government could impose a small, almost invisible micro tax on every payment, every transfer, every trade. Think of it like a digital sales tax, but one that's automatically collected on every economic action. It would be frictionless, inescapable, and create a revenue stream of unimaginable scale. The Treasury has already talked about filling regulatory gaps in crypto markets, which could be the justification for inserting government-approved services into the heart of the system. The second, more subtle approach is through the banks. As financial institutions tokenize stocks, bonds, and real estate, They'll need to operate on government approved blockchains. The Treasury could mandate that these regulated players use specific networks where the government acts as a primary validator. This would let it collect fees not just on currency, but on the movement of all tokenized assets. This step is the linchpin. The revenue generated from these micro taxes could then be used to fund the acquisition of more Bitcoin for the strategic reserve. It creates a self sustaining loop. The more the digital economy grows, the more fee revenue the government collects. The more revenue it collects, the more Bitcoin it can acquire. And the more Bitcoin it acquires, the more power it has. This is the ultimate monetization of the payment rails. It's a shift from taxing outcomes, like income, to taxing the process itself. The government doesn't just make the rules, it owns the cash register. Step 6. A new Bretton Woods. Engineering the global reset. With the domestic infrastructure in place, the sixth step is to take this new model of monetary power and project it onto the global stage. This is about engineering a new international financial system, a digital era Bretton Woods, with the US once again at the center. The original Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944 made the US dollar the world's reserve currency. Other currencies were pegged to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold. This gave the US what's called an exorbitant privilege, the ability to print the world's money and export its inflation. That system broke when the US ran low on gold, but the dollar's dominance has mostly continued. Today, that dominance is under threat. Geopolitical rivals are looking for alternatives, and digital assets are the first real technological challenge to the dollar in 50 years. The Treasury's plan isn't to fight this change, but to co-opt it. They're preparing to transition the world from a dollar standard backed by faith to a digital dollar ecosystem backed by Bitcoin. Here's how the pieces fit globally. By creating a clear regulatory framework, the US encourages the world's innovators to build within its system. This is about exporting the US regulatory model. At the heart of this new system would be a US regulated stablecoin market and a wholesale CBDC for banks. These digital dollars would offer the speed of crypto with the perceived safety of US backing. They would become the default currency for the global digital economy. But what would back this new digital dollar in a world skeptical of government money? This is where the strategic Bitcoin reserve becomes the ultimate geopolitical trump card. While the digital dollar handles transactions, the US government's massive Bitcoin holdings would serve as the system's neutral reserve asset. Think of it as Bretton Woods 2.0. Instead of foreign central banks holding dollars redeemable for gold, they'd use digital dollars implicitly backed by the largest sovereign stockpile of Bitcoin on the planet. The US wouldn't even need to make the dollar convertible to Bitcoin. The mere existence of its massive reserve would create confidence and anchor the system. It would signal to the world that while other countries are just playing with CBDCs, the US controls the underlying digital commodity that holds the real value. This strategy neutralizes rivals. By leading the charge and cornering the market on the primary reserve asset, the Treasury isn't just preparing for a new financial system, it's building it in America's image, extending its financial supremacy for another century. Step 7, the end game. Digital gold in the Treasury's vault. And now we've arrived at the final step. It's the culmination of everything. The gold playbook, the CBDC Trojan Horse, the legal takeover, the strategic hoarding, monetizing the rails, and the global reset. The final step is to lock in Bitcoin's role not as a currency for you and me, but as an exclusive reserve asset for the state. The end game is not for you to buy your coffee with Bitcoin. The government has no interest in a world where its citizens use a censorship-resistant currency it can't control. Their own reports on CBDCs make it clear their goal is to enhance their control over money, not give it up. The true end game is for Bitcoin to become the government's gold for the 21st century. It will be an asset held by nations, not spent by people. Its purpose, from the Treasury's view, is to sit in a digital vault, the strategic Bitcoin reserve, and act as the ultimate neutral store of value backing the entire US-led digital financial system. In this new world, the public will use a highly controlled, fully surveilled digital dollar. The illusion of choice will be there, but every transaction will run on government-approved rails, subject to government fees and oversight. The freedom and sovereignty that Bitcoin was created for will be reserved for the state itself. The US government will hold Bitcoin for the same reasons individuals do: its absolute scarcity, its hardness, and its role as a hedge against currency debasement. By stacking the largest hoard, the Treasury ensures no other nation can challenge its top position. It becomes the digital Fort Knox, the ultimate guarantor of value in a world of otherwise flimsy digital currencies. The language in the proposed legislation is the biggest tell. The Bitcoin in the strategic reserve is not to be sold. It is to be maintained as reserve assets. This isn't a trade, it's a permanent treasury holding, just like the gold in Fort Knox. The final irony is that the government is using Bitcoin's own properties against the ideals it represents. It's using a decentralized tool to re-centralize global power. The seven-step plan is a masterclass in co-option, ending with the truly free asset locked away for the government's exclusive use. This is the Treasury's Bitcoin endgame. So there you have it, the seven-step plan laid bare. This isn't some far-fetched conspiracy. It's a sequence of documented actions, policy papers, and proposed laws that, when you put them together, reveal a clear strategy: replicate the gold playbook, introduce a CBDC as a Trojan horse, seize regulatory control of all digital assets, establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve for national accumulation, monetize the new financial rails as the digital toll booth, engineer a global reset around this new system, and finally, solidify Bitcoin as digital gold for governments, not people. The architects of our financial system aren't being disrupted by Bitcoin. They're working to absorb it. They're building a future where they offer the public a digital currency of control while they hold the digital asset of freedom. They understand the power of scarce digital property better than anyone, and they have a plan to be its ultimate beneficiary. The decisions being made in Washington today will define money for the next generation and determine the balance of power between the state and the individual. By understanding this endgame, you're no longer just a passive observer. You know the playbook. You can see the moves as they're made and position yourself accordingly. The greatest transfer of wealth in history is happening, but it's also a transfer of power. The only question is, who will be left holding the keys? If this analysis was valuable and you want to keep getting ahead of the official narratives, I've created a free newsletter that goes even deeper. It's where I share the data and insights that don't make it into these videos. Exclusive analysis on the economy, digital assets, and the government's next moves. Click the link in the description to sign up. It's free, and it's the best way to make sure you never miss a critical piece of the puzzle. Thanks for watching. Stay vigilant.